Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Vianora Vinca. Since her nomination to the Supreme Court, much of the media buzz about Judge Sonia Sotomayor has been around her comment comparing her sensibilities as a Latina to that of a white man. But how is the Puerto Rican judge and her comments playing in communities of color?
On this edition of Independent Sources, we explore why Judge Sotomayor's experiences may resonate with African Americans and immigrants as well as other Latinos.
We commemorate the events at Tiananmen Square 20 years later and look back through the eyes of one of our own.
We meet a Sikh who is seeking to make history, and we profile a news organization that wants New Yorkers to know that Harlem is still here. These stories and news of the week after this.
The reason we need ethnic media is simply because corporate media, mainstream media, is not concerned about the individual groups that compose society. All they're looking for is getting eyeballs on their content so that they can expose people to the products that they're selling.
Judge Sonia Sotomayor, President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, is a self-described Nuyorican. After her father died, she was raised by her mother in a multi-ethnic, multicultural housing project in the Bronx. Sotomayor has received strong support not just from Latinos, but from other ethnic groups as well. To discuss this historic nomination, I'm joined by Elaine Rivera of WNYC Radio, Carolina González, a journalist and author, and David González of the New York Times. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Garry.
Elaine, we hear so much about this post-racial America. When you saw Judge Sotomayor walk on the podium with President Obama, what was this moment like for you?
Well, Garry, I've been telling friends and colleagues that if someone had told me 5 years ago that there would be a black president electing a Puerto Rican woman to the Supreme Court, or there'd be life on Mars, I would have said life on Mars. It was really a stunning moment, and it speaks to really the best and the idealistic notions of this country. And I remember interviewing, when Barack Obama, during the election, a teacher up in the Bronx who's African American, and most of his students at one of the public schools are African American, and he said, Barack Obama needs to get elected because I could go in there with a straight face and say, you could be anything you want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing speaks to Sonia Sotomayor. I mean, just the impact she has had on the Latino community, and young Latina girls, young Latinos, and immigrants, and Americans in general who really work hard, get an education, that that there is a meritocracy.
David, Judge Sotomayor is from the South Bronx. Obama passed among the candidates an African-American woman. Yet we see there's a lot of excitement from the African-American media and the public in general about her nomination. What in a Nuyorican experience that also speak to African-American?
I think what it speaks to is a couple of things, actually. One of the things is it speaks to the redemption, if you will, of the parent's sacrifice, which a lot of people can identify with. I mean, some people said the mother should have been nominated for the Supreme Court more than anything else, and I'm not going to argue with that one. But it also speaks to something which is Nuyorican of our generation. I'm going to be 52, she's 54. We traveled similar paths, Catholic schools in the Bronx, Ivy League educations. That's a crucial thing, because unlike our parents' generation, I think she has had more exposure to different groups. In college, she has worked with African Americans in coalitions. She's worked with Chicanos, which is probably the first time many of us from New York City in that era, had any kind of working relationship with other types of Latinos. And I think there's an ability to have empathy and a good working relationship that becomes evident over time, I think. And I think that's why she has that kind of appeal, because we've talked about in the past about the black-brown divide, if you will. And that might be true if it was true, perhaps for our parents' generation. But a generation like hers, that's been raised with African Americans and has a working relationship, a professional relationship, or an academic relationship with them and working with them, that spills over into her worldview, and I think people pick up on that.
Carolina, speaking of black and brown divide, we've discussed this on this show with you a few times. Do you want to talk about that one more time?
Well, I'm tired. It's like I'm sick of talking about it, because it's this sort of straw man that keeps rearing his head, and you have to keep beating it with a piñata stick. The Time article that has, you know, there was this article that came out in Time magazine that brought it up again. And the funny thing is that all these articles that keep talking about the black and brown divide always circle back to this infamous piece that came out, I think it was in the LA Times, which talked about a particular case in LA, and then expanded it to say, you know, blacks and Latinos hate each other. And there are some very real political, economic, social rivalries in specific communities coming out of specific circumstances, but to kind of say all black people hate all Latin people and vice versa is crazy, starting with the fact that, again, a lot of us are both black and Latino, and as David was saying, you know, a lot of us have grown up next to each other, date each other, marry each other, so, you know, to just generalize it is crazy.
I think part of it is also, I mean, if you look at it this way, I was talking with Manuel del Valle, who grew up in the projects on Amsterdam Avenue in the 1960s, went to Princeton before Sonia did. He said the first thing he did when he got to Princeton, he saw the African American students had an association, he founded one. He said flat out, I shamelessly copied everything the African American students did. So they patterned themselves on the African American students, and they found working relationships. That can't be underestimated, I think, really.
You know, Elaine, let's move on to talk a little bit more about, you know, her life, because she considered herself an immigrant, but the National Association of Hispanic Journalists put out a press release saying she's not an immigrant, she's a Puerto Rican. What is it about a Puerto Rican's upbringing that's similar to that of an immigrant in this country?
Well, first of all, Puerto Ricans are American citizens, so, you know, the notion of immigrant, I mean, she didn't have to come here, she didn't have to, you know, get citizenship. But coming here as a Puerto Rican, you face a lot of struggles that immigrants do, particularly Puerto Ricans who left the island. When her parents left the island, there were socioeconomic issues of that generation. It was poor Puerto Ricans who came to the United States, and they faced discrimination. I mean, when I was growing up, you know, it was, and I'm sure it was in New York, you didn't even call yourself Puerto Rican, you called yourself Spanish. Right? You didn't even, so,
we just dated ourselves.
So there was tremendous amount, and you were also invisible. You didn't exist. So
and there is the language issue also. I mean,
exactly.
You know,
the language.
You know, I mean, most Puerto Ricans, especially in that generation, were coming here not knowing English. So it's a very parallel experience.
There's also the same. I mean, it's the same thing that Central Americans are going through. There are like global economic forces at play. And Puerto Rico is an agrarian economy that is being transformed into an industrial economy. To a huge displacement from the countryside to New York, which is what you see, for example, in El Salvador or Guatemala. You know, to places in the States.
Do you think she'll be have more in common with women on the court, or do you expect her to be more in tune with gender issues?
Well, it depends on what gender issues. We don't really know her stance. She's been very under the radar on the abortion issue. But clearly, you know, a lot of her rulings have to do with, I mean, she really is a moderate, and you know, I'm not going to speculate on how she would rule, but you know, if you look at moderates in the past on the Supreme Court, you know how they're going to rule, most likely rule on Roe versus Wade. So I'm sure she's going to be very, you know, empathetic. When they said she was empathetic, I don't understand what's wrong with empathy. It is a quality that we should all have as human beings. You know, you put yourself, you know, in another person's shoes. It doesn't mean you're always going to agree, but a person, even if you disagree with, you put yourself in that person's shoes to try to understand them.
David?
This quality of empathy, I think it is something that is born of the Nuyorican experience, if you will, to some extent, because we have to straddle several worlds. We have to straddle several realities, you know, the dominant culture, the culture in the neighborhood, the culture in the home, the culture on the island. I think in embracing that and coming from that, I think you do have an ability to have some universality, actually, oddly enough, that you are able to look at things from different perspectives. And I think she'll bring that because of her upbringing, which is not a negative. You
know, it's interesting because when Clarence Thomas was nominated by the first Bush, African American were totally disappointed because of his ideology, and I think now African Americans find a lot of commonality with Judge Sotomayor. I mean, what do you think?
Sotomayor she is in the middle to moderate, whereas no, I don't think people in this country want far left or far right, and clearly Clarence Thomas had very far right positions. So I think that's what people took issue with. In the African American community.
Carolina?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also think that, I mean, one of the things that's been so appealing about her life story or this idea of empathy and the ability to put, you know, yourself in other people's shoes, I don't think anybody would have ever associated the word empathy with Clarence Thomas. I mean, he really kind of came across as somebody who was, you know, extremely careerist and just, you know, trying to figure out what was the stance that was going to get him furthest ahead. So, I mean, you're talking about, you know, you really are comparing apples and oranges in a way, just character-wise, policy-wise, and, you know, approach-wise.
But I also think he's of a generation also that I think, you know, for better or worse, the reality is for some members of that generation, it was a question about this is a meritocracy, I'm going to get forward on the basis of my talents, not my ethnicity, not my race. And there is a strain that goes that way. And I think, you know, he represents some of that too. So, I mean, whereas Sonia grew up a little later in a city where there was ethnic pride, there was national pride, and I think she was able to embrace that and there was no negatives, whereas perhaps in the 1950s and 40s in the South, there might have been some consequences to that.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but we'll continue to follow Judge Sotomayor's confirmation process. Elaine Rivera of WNYC Radio, David González of the New York Times, and Carolina González, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Now, here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. The Jewish Forward reports that Yeshivat Maharat, a new Jewish school, will be training women as clergy. The institution will offer a 4-year program to women who want to become Orthodox spiritual leaders. These women will not be called rabbis after completing the course. The institution is still working on what they will be called. From India abroad, the Obama administration is using Facebook and Twitter to promote a terrorism-free South Asia. The State Department recently conducted a web chat focusing on India's relationship with Pakistan, highlighting that India is open to a better relationship with Pakistanis. Chats have been scheduled in the coming months to focus on various South Asian countries. In other news out of Pakistan, Press TV reports that the country has decided to retain its nuclear storage a few days after 2 deadly bombings in the region. The Prime Minister, Yusuf Raza Gilani, assured Washington officials that Pakistan's nuclear assets will not fall into militants' hands. Pakistan is one of the states refusing international calls to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. From the Amsterdam News, a brand new multimedia culture hub will open in Harlem this June. The Dwyer Cultural Center, located on St. Nicholas Avenue, will host art exhibitions, musical performances, and educational workshops to celebrate Harlem's history. The center will also develop educational programs to serve students throughout the city. And finally, from the Jewish Week, Jewish girls finally have an American Girl. Popular doll company American Girl, known for its historical dolls, has introduced a new Jewish doll, Rebecca Rubin. Rebecca portrays a young girl who lives on the Lower East Side during the early 1900s, when old Jewish traditions begin to conflict with American traditions. Those are just a few stories from the ethnic media.
It's been 20 years since soldiers fired on protesters at Tiananmen Square. Pro-democracy, anti-corruption demonstrations were held in other cities in China on June 4, 1989, but it was the one in Beijing that turned deadly. The number of deaths is still unknown. Joining me to discuss how Tiananmen Square is remembered 2 decades later is Joe Wei, national editor of World Journal. Thank you for being here, Joe.
Yes.
There are a series of events happening in the U.S. and abroad to mark the 20th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. How is the World Journal covering them?
Well, we've been covering this since 20 years ago. We cover this every year. And this year we started about, so I've been covering this for 3 days in a series about what's happening after 20 years. We cover where the 21s wanted to list the students we're about today. We tell our readers what are they doing, what are they thinking about today. Also, we cover the publication of the secret memoir recorded by the ousted the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Mr. Zhao Ziyang, who just published his, he's been dead for about a couple of years, and he published secretly his memoir regarding how the decision of shooting the students was made and how the Chinese economic reform started. And we also cover how the people, how the students and how the young generation after the 89, and how did they think, how did they thought about the Tiananmen Square's massacre.
You have also an article about the 21 students who were on the want list,
yes.
and you are following where they are now.
Yes.
Where are they now?
Most of them are in the United States. They are doing their own works. Some of them have become a very successful investment banker, who other went into the other ventures. One guy has become a U.S. Army chaplain who recently been in Hong Kong to participate the rally in memory of the June 4th. This is done by we sort of make the expert from books made by one of dissident leaders, Feng Congde, who was one of the student leader on the square 20 years ago, and he recently published books regarding where and those 21 wanted students were about today. So we interviewed him. We sort of reported the whole story.
Speaking of students, are the students in China today knowledgeable about Tiananmen Square?
From our understanding, it's not, because not only the textbooks didn't really record this tragedy among Chinese history. Even up to date now, the foreign ministry of the China still deny this when being asked about the publication of the memoir of the Premier Zhao Ziyang. The foreign ministry spokesperson answered the question, say this is already been concluded. Their conclusion is we're not going to talk about it though. However, the next days, if you went up to the foreign ministry website, you won't see this part of a transcript being recorded on their transcript. In other words, we did report it, but there's no records exist in the whole history of the Chinese official records, though. Yes.
Are you hearing about things happening in China today to commemorate 20 years? Are journalists daring to write anything you hear?
Yes, we sense there is some kind of loosening up toward the in memory of the June 4th massacre. For instance, there is some unpublicized conference in talking about the meaning of the June 4th to the Chinese political and economic development. And also there's some other small gathering, privately small gathering to talk about, and also in memory of the primary Zhao Ziyang. To some extent, as long as there are no organized efforts or a national-wide effort and to commemorate in memory of the June 4th, that probably will be okay, because the current leader of the Chinese Communist Party, most of them have nothing to deal with the decision being made, why and how the June 4th incident happened, though. So they try to stay away from them, though.
We only have a few seconds left. I'd like to ask you quickly, can Tiananmen Square happen again?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. The Chinese right now, they have too much at stake right now, and the history cannot go back. We learn a lot as a country, as a race, as a people. We learn a lot from the Tiananmen Square. I think the democracy should be opened up. Will come to China one day. Yes.
And on that note, we'll wrap it here. Joe Wei, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for being with us. Today at Independent Sources, we know Wei Lu as an editor extraordinaire. But 20 years ago, on June 4th, he was a photojournalist covering the protests in Beijing at Tiananmen Square. Here's a look back at the events that day through his eyes. This month will feature a series of stories produced by students at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. This one focuses on a city council race in Queens and a candidate who hopes to make history. Jaqueline Linge reports.
In this country, so long your group is not being represented, you're nobody.
Meet 55-year-old Swaranjit Singh, native of Punjab, India, citizen of the United States, resident of Queens, New York, and candidate for New York City Council. He is a Sikh who wants to make history.
There has never been a South Asian, forget about Sikh, there's never been a South Asian person ever been represented in City Council.
Mr. Singh, who is running for the District 23 seat in Queens, is collecting campaign donations at a record pace for a non-incumbent. Singh has raised more than $100,000 in less than 6 months, and there are still 5 more months to go until the voting begins.
We have been trying that somebody with the turban or identity come in the government office and represent us, and we don't get proper representation.
Swaranjit Singh immigrated to the United States in 1982. He got his start in community service in the aftermath of 9/11, enduring insults and physical attacks.
Many times people have called me Osama, and because out of ignorance, people have no idea who the Sikhs are. People think, oh, the guys, those who wear a turban, they're part of Islam, or we are followers of Osama bin Laden.
Singh was inspired to quit his sales job, where he was earning about $150,000 a year. He founded the World Sikh Peace Foundation, dedicated to educating the community about Sikhism, India's youngest monotheistic religion.
It made me to think why people are acting the way they are acting. And that time I realized partly it is our fault too. We did not reach out to people, we did not tell people who the Sikhs are.
What we are seeing is a maturing of many immigrant communities. And you can see that very clearly in terms of the South Asian population. And one aspect of this maturity is that there are quite a few individuals who have been building networks with leaders for all these years. And now I think they are coming onto their own.
Which is what Bob Friedrich, Swaranjit Singh's opponent, is up against. Friedrich says that while he welcomes change, he has cast himself as the non-ethnic candidate.
When there are curbs or sidewalks that are broken and need to be repaired, they're not Sikh curbs, they're not Jewish curbs, they're not Italian curbs. They're curbs that are in a community that need to be repaired. It's about local issues, it's about local politics. And I try really very hard not to divide the community and pit one group against another.
But Friedrich, who has been active in the community for over 20 years, faces another big challenge. People are clearly excited about a new face on the political scene.
Everybody wanted to see him as Obama of this New York. He's our Obama. Yeah.
You will see me as a new city council member. First city council member in America with a turban.
For Independent Sources, I'm Jaqueline Linge.
You promised me the world. Is this what you had in mind?
Every choice we make has a consequence. Help EarthShare and its members restore balance to the world. Visit earthshare.org and see what you can do. EarthShare, one environment, one simple way to care for it.
Joseph Hayden founded a news production company in Harlem last year with just $40,000. His organization now has a website and a weekly show on cable. Hayden's mission is to report all that's happening in Harlem. He wants New Yorkers to know that the historic black neighborhood is still here. Adeola Oladele visited the newsroom.
Driving through Harlem, one may not easily notice a new newsroom known as Still Here, located on 138th Street on the west side. The two-room office is run by 4 men who train themselves in the art of journalism. Their motto is giving a voice to the voiceless. They do that by covering the politics, sports, and all happenings in Harlem.
I started Still Here Harlem production with the intention of creating a miniature CNN for Harlem.
The founder, Joseph Hayden, is popularly known as Jazz. The 68-year-old was not always a model citizen. Hayden earned a bachelor's from SUNY Newport and a master's from New York Theological Seminary while he was an inmate in New York State Prison.
My story is one of overcoming obstacles, you know. I got kicked out of school when I was in the first grade. I ended up getting kicked out of every school I ever went to. But I've been a criminal, I've been an athlete, I've been a musician, I've been an organizer.
The great-grandfather says he got the name Still Here from watching the movie Papillon. The movie starred Steve McQueen as a criminal who escapes an island prison after several attempts.
But the phrase also applies to survivors all over the world, whether it's from natural disasters or personal problems or whatever it is. If you survive it, you're still here.
Hayden says he opened the newsroom last year with his savings and donations from a friend, a total of $40,000. He explained that it's because the mainstream media is only focusing on the upper class and not on the local people.
But nobody looked down at the base of the pyramid. You know, nobody looked at the Harlems of America. Nobody asked their opinion.
Still Here gained national recognition after covering a mass rally against what critics called a racist cartoon published by the New York Post in February. The video made it to CNN's website, attracting 10,000 clicks that night. Now the newsroom is attracting younger people like 27-year-old Paolo Walker, who works there full-time.
I could probably get a free internship where maybe I'll be getting coffee for people or doing some menial tasks, but here I can come in and have access to great equipment. Also, I have a great personal relationship with Jazz, who I've learned a lot from, you know, personally and also in the business sense as well.
Still Here produces a weekly show on Manhattan Neighborhood Network called All Things Harlem. The production company is also in the process of partnering with other local media to survive these tough economic times. The staff at Still Here are hoping that media like this, focusing on the local people, will continue to spring up all over the U.S. in the nearest future. For Independent Sources, I'm Adeola Oladele.
That's our show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
In the meantime, be independent-minded.